Welcome. We will be hearing the myth of Perseus, Dioneus, and the Gorgons. Our story begins with a demigod named Perseus. But first, we must go back to the king Acrisius and his story to understand why Perseus is determined to come back and claim the throne for himself.
Acrisius did not like his daughter because he wanted a son. His daughter's name was Danae, the mother of Perseus. Acrisius, Danae's father, locked her in a chamber where there was only a small opening in the roof. This was because Acrisius was told that one day the child of Danae would kill him. He thought that if he kept her locked up, she could have no child. Eventually, Jupiter came down as a golden shower to accompany Danae in her loneliness. Zeus impregnated Danae, and then Danae became the wife of Jupiter. Danae soon had a baby, but her father, Acrisius, heard the cries of the baby from in the chamber, and with anger tore down the walls. He sought to kill his grandson, but when he heard it was the child of Jupiter, he backed off, because he knew he could not kill Danae's son, Perseus. Acrisius, thinking he could be wise, put Danae and Perseus into a chest, and threw them into the ocean. Acrisius knew that, by doing so, Neptune would be the one to blame if they drowned.
Jupiter guided the chest that Danae and Perseus were in to an island, where a fisherman caught them. Danae told the fisherman about everything that had happened. The fisherman was a kind-hearted man and allowed them to live in his hut. Perseus grew up there. On the island, there lived a king who wanted to marry Danae. Danae declined because she was the wife of Jupiter. Perseus protected his mother so that the king of the island would not get Danae. The king wanted to get rid of Perseus. So when the king said he was going to have a party because he was going to get married to the neighboring princess, Perseus had no gifts. Perseus decided to offer his service as a gift. A smile crept upon the face of the king. Perseus was told to kill Medusa and bring back her head. The king knew that would get rid of Perseus for good, since everyone who had been sent to kill Medusa had never come back. Perseus left. He went around asking people where the Gorgons lived, but no one knew. Perseus came to a crossroads. As he stood there, Minerva and Mercury appeared. Minerva gave Perseus a mirror shield. Mercury gave Perseus a special sword that could cut metals and shoes with wings. They told him to find the Grey Sisters. Perseus set out to find the Grey Sisters. He took the Grey Sisters' eye and asked them where the Gorgons lived. The Grey Sisters told him where the Gorgons were, but nothing else, because they did not want to mess with fate.
The Gorgons were three monsters, daughters of Echidna and Typhon, the mother and father of all monsters. Their names were Stheno, Ariel, and the most famous of them, Medusa. Although the first two were immortal, Medusa was not. Oddly, Medusa was also not considered the child of Echidna and Typhon, but of Phorkys and Cato. Their faces were ugly, and their hair was replaced by snakes. Anyone who would gaze into their eyes would be turned to stone instantly. Perseus set off. When he came to the land, he realized that there were many statues. Perseus was told that he could not look at Medusa because he would turn to stone at the sight of her. He started hearing hissing noises, almost like snakes. Perseus thought to himself that maybe if he looked in the reflection of his mirrored shield, he could at least see who he was fighting. And indeed, those sounds were snakes. But these snakes were attached to Medusa's head and dangled like hair. Perseus and Medusa battled, and finally, with a swift cut with his blade, Medusa's head fell off. And as he went to pick the head up, something started to come out of Medusa's body. Out came a Pegasus. Later, Perseus heard sounds of hissing, but this time it was not snakes. He knew it had to be Medusa's other two sisters, so he ran off before they could tear him apart. On his way back to Greece, he saw that a girl was chained to a rock, and there was a big sea monster coming up to eat her. So he held Medusa's head up and turned the sea monster to stone. Perseus continued onto the island and turned Polydectes the king into stone. Afterwards, he returned home to confront Acrisius. When Perseus got there, Acrisius fled. Later on, Acrisius was killed by a flying disc in a game that Perseus was participating in. So in the end, the fate was true that Acrisius would die at the hands of Perseus.
And so we end our story here with the young hero Perseus, who had gained honor for himself and now sits victorious upon the throne of his grandfather, Acrisius.
Danaus and Aegyptus were two brothers of royal lineage. One settled in Libya and the other in Arabia. Aegyptus had by different wives 50 sons, and Danaus had 50 daughters. The two brothers fell into strife about the succession to their father's kingdom, and Danaus, fearing for the safety of his daughters and himself, fled with them to Argos. The sons of Aegyptus pursued, and by force or persuasion prevailed upon Danaus to give them his daughters in marriage. But after the wedding feast, Danaus bade his daughters slay their husbands during the night. Thus all the young men perished, except Lycias, whom his bride Hypermnestra allowed to escape. For this disobedience she was imprisoned by her father. Meanwhile, her sisters had sunk the heads of their murdered husbands in the Lynerian marsh, and had been cleansed of their guilt by Hermes and Athena. Afterwards, Danaus released Hypermnestra and gave his sanction to her marriage with Lycias. His other daughters were married to the victors chosen in an athletic contest. Thank you for watching the myth of Perseus, Danaus, and the Gorgons.